Have you ever stopped to think about the real price of trust? I found out exactly what it costs. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. That was the precise amount of time it took for me to systematically demolish the only true love I had ever known. All because of a deception that started as a small seed and grew into a forest that choked out everything. 6 months ago, on the night of our engagement, I brought Leo to the Sinclair estate in Beverly Hills. My estate, a place he never knew was mine, and I saw something in his eyes I will never be able to unsee. It wasn't the shock of the immense wealth, but the sharp, gut-wrenching pain of betrayal. I never pictured myself, Madison Sinclair, heir to one of America's most significant private fortunes, sitting on the floor of my apartment-sized walk-in closet, scribbling "rules for dating while incognito" into a cheap notebook from Target. What was the first and most critical rule? Under no circumstances ever mention Dad's Warhol collection or the family helicopter. It sounds pathetic, I know. But something inside me shattered after I caught Chad, my last boyfriend, sending pictures of the mansion's interior to a reality TV producer with the caption, "How much do you think we can get for a season when we're married?" Chloe, my best friend since kindergarten and the only one in on my secret, leaned against the doorframe with an expression that said she was watching a slow-motion car crash. "Maddie, this is completely insane. Why can't you just get an ironclad prenup like any other normal billionaire heiress would?" She casually popped an organic blueberry from the crystal bowl our housekeeper had left on a silver tray. "Because I don't want someone who agrees to love my money," I shot back, my eyes fixed on the notebook. "I want someone who loves me in spite of the lack of it." Now, standing before the full-length mirror, I barely recognized the woman in the old navy jeans and plain t-shirt. My collection of Louboutins and Birkin bags was tucked away in a hidden, climate-controlled compartment. Yes, my paranoia had reached that level. "I can't. I'm totally broke until payday," I rehearsed, trying to make the words sound natural. My reflection seemed to be laughing right back at me. "Do you really think anyone is going to buy this performance?" Yet the apartment in Silver Lake was already leased. A fabricated resume listing me as a marketing coordinator was created, and tomorrow, my new life was set to begin. What could possibly go wrong? Seriously, who could have guessed my brand new fabricated life would kick off in a bank line? And no, it wasn't for a heist. It was for something infinitely more dangerous. The line at the Chase Bank in downtown LA seemed to stretch into infinity that sweltering Friday afternoon. My first field mission as an ordinary person was proving to be an extreme test of my patience. The air conditioning was on the fritz, and I could feel a single bead of sweat, actual sweat, trickling down my back. Who knew regular people perspired so much? In front of me, a woman was loudly complaining about the mobile app being down, while the tellers offered those tight, strained smiles of people who desperately want to curse but really need their jobs. This is usually the point in the movie where we all turn into villains and plot a hostile takeover, isn't it? The voice came from my right, and as I turned, I was met by a pair of laughing brown eyes. This stranger had slightly tousled hair, carried a battered architect's portfolio, and was smiling as if we were all sharing a private joke instead of enduring a collective form of torture. "I can already see tomorrow's headlines. Underpaid architect leads rebellion at downtown bank," he continued, getting a few chuckles from those around us. "I'd be in charge of securing the student loan forgiveness funds," I heard myself say, before my brain could stop me, amazed at my own quick wit. "I've always dreamed of being a corporate Robin Hood." He let out a real laugh, and my stomach did a curious little flip. "Leo Martinez," he introduced himself, holding out a hand. "Maddie Smith," I replied, using my fake last name and feeling a strange tingle as our hands touched. "Nice bag, by the way," he remarked offhandedly. My heart instantly seized. It was a $5,000 Prada. "That's a great knockoff. Looks just like the real thing." I released a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. If he only knew. You think exchanging phone numbers was the most stressful part? Just wait until you see the catastrophe that unfolded when I tried to impress him with my completely non-existent culinary abilities. "Do you honestly think you need to strategically place fake overdue bills on the table?" Chloe asked, looking on in horror as I carefully arranged a second notice from SoCal Edison and a maxed-out Capital One statement on the coffee table of my Silver Lake rental. "The devil is in the details," I answered with the deadpan seriousness of someone orchestrating a NASA mission, not a colossal lie. The apartment was small, but charming. One bedroom, a cozy living space, and an open-concept kitchen. I had furnished the entire place with items from IKEA and Target's Studio McGee line. Nothing that screamed, "I have a trust fund," but also not so bleak that it looked like I was living in poverty. "You've basically created a character for a Hallmark movie," Chloe sighed, collapsing onto the sofa I had specifically chosen because it looked just worn in enough. "So, what's the end game here? When are you planning to tell him? 6 months from now? A year? At the altar?" I avoided her gaze, busying myself with arranging some second-hand books on a shelf. "I'll tell him when I'm sure he likes me for me," I muttered. The truth was, even I had no idea how long this experiment would last. A small part of me was already wondering if I was going completely off the deep end. The next evening, everything was set for my first dinner with Leo at my new home. I had decided to cook, an activity I had never once attempted, but how hard could it be? Extremely hard, I soon discovered, as the lasagna sauce began to spectacularly catch fire at the exact moment the doorbell rang. Leo had arrived 15 minutes early, finding me in a full-blown panic, swatting at the flames with a dish towel that had, in turn, also ignited. "You know," he said with unnerving calm as he grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, which I didn't even know was there. "I normally wait until at least the third date to witness an act of culinary arson." As we later ordered a pizza and opened a bottle of 2-Buck Chuck, I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, I had gotten myself into something far more complicated than I had ever anticipated. If you think nearly setting an apartment on fire during a first date is rock bottom, it's only because you haven't seen me try to navigate the city bus system yet, to operate a washing machine. I never imagined that a simple trip to the grocery store could be such a profound, soul-searching experience. There I was, Madison Sinclair, pardon me, Smith, staring down an aisle of laundry detergents as if they were ancient hieroglyphics. Tide or gain? And why on God's green earth were there 15 different versions of the exact same product? Back at the estate, these things just materialized, magically, as if a laundry fairy visited in the night. I grabbed the one with the biggest sale sticker and tossed it into my cart, feeling a bizarre surge of pride for this minor adulting victory. "You've been staring at that box of spaghetti for 3 solid minutes, a voice chirped, pulling me from my pasta-induced existential crisis. It was Mrs. Gable, my neighbor from 3B. In her late 60s, with a built-in radar for young women who clearly don't know how to boil water, she had unofficially appointed herself as my real-world survival guide. "I'm just, weighing the carb-to-price ratio," I lied, unwilling to admit I was trying to remember the fundamental steps of cooking. She rolled her eyes, but with a smile. "You come over for dinner tonight. I'll teach you how to make a bolognese that'll knock the socks off that architect you won't stop talking about." A couple of weeks later, Leo showed me his own apartment, a tiny studio in Echo Park, even smaller than my fake place. But there was something about the way the afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the stacks of architecture books and the struggling plants on his small balcony, that felt more like home than any of the sprawling properties my family owned. "Sorry about the mess," he said, subtly kicking a stray sock under the sofa. "Architects are organized on paper, but chaotic in life." As he passionately showed me his blueprints for a low-income housing project in East LA, a sharp pang of guilt struck me. I was merely playing a game of being poor. He was out here, in the real world, trying to build a better one. What kind of person did that make me? You'd think I was getting pretty good at this whole normal person act, right? Well, the universe loves a good cosmic joke, and it was about to make me the punchline. 6 months into our relationship, I was becoming a master of my own elaborate fiction. I had memorized the names of every fictitious colleague at my fictitious job. I knew the bus schedule I pretended to follow, and I had even developed a genuine friendship with Mrs. Gable and her husband. Leo and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm of cheap takeout dinners, Netflix binges, a far cry from my old life of Michelin star restaurants with private sommeliers, and conversations that stretched late into the night. To my own astonishment, I was truly happy. And then came that fateful Tuesday. "Chloe, I just saw a necklace at Tiffany's that I absolutely need. It's only $25,000. Going to pick it up with Richard after lunch." I hit send, and only then, with a dawning, sickening horror, did I see Leo's name at the top of the chat window. My blood turned to ice. I glanced at the clock. He was in a major client meeting and might not see it for hours. Or he could be looking at his phone right this second. "It's for my improv class. I'm playing this insufferable rich girl character," I typed frantically, my fingers fumbling. Followed by, "Who's Richard?" and "Ignore. Phone must be hacked." My God, I was just digging the hole deeper with every word. The next 3 hours were a blur of escalating panic. I called his cell, off, then his office, still in the meeting. When I finally tracked him down at a coffee shop near his firm, I was braced for a dramatic confrontation. "About that text message," I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. Leo just raised an eyebrow, looking confused. "That weird one about a necklace and some guy named Richard? I figured it was some bizarre spam, or you'd sent it to the wrong group chat." He shrugged, completely unbothered. "You really think I'd believe that you, the woman who meticulously clips coupons with me every Sunday, would spend the price of a new car on a piece of jewelry?" He laughed, and I joined in, a hysterical, shaky laugh of pure relief. If he trusted me this completely, why couldn't I bring myself to trust him with the truth? A text message almost blew my cover, but it was a cheap pair of earrings that would truly begin to shatter my millionaire's heart. "I discovered something remarkable about birthdays when you're pretending to be broke. People remember them without a calendar reminder from your personal assistant. On the morning of my 30th birthday, Leo showed up at my door at 7 a.m., holding a lopsided, homemade cupcake with a single candle, the result, I'd later learn, of 3 failed baking attempts, and a small package wrapped in brown paper from a local bookstore. "It's not much," he said, looking nervous as I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a pair of delicate silver earrings with small turquoise stones, the very same ones I had casually pointed to in the window of a small artisan shop at the Silver Lake Flea Market months ago, murmuring, "Those are beautiful," before moving on. "How did you—" I started, genuinely stunned. No one had ever paid such close attention to a throwaway comment of mine. In my real life, I'd point at a painting or a piece of jewelry, and it would magically appear in my possession the next day. No effort, no sacrifice, just money doing what money does. "I just saved up a little each month," Leo shrugged, as if it were nothing. It was later that day, when we were at his place, that I noticed the empty shelves and cardboard boxes in the corner of his studio. "What's all this?" I asked. "Oh, just some stuff I sold," he replied vaguely. His vinyl collection, his passion, his treasure, the one thing he swore he'd never part with, for a $200 pair of earrings. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom of my fake apartment and wept with a kind of raw, ugly honesty I didn't know I was capable of. What kind of monster had I become? While I was hiding millions, he was selling the things he loved most to give me a gift that, to me, cost less than a casual lunch. I called Chloe, utterly wrecked. "I think I'm actually in love with him," I sobbed into the phone. "Then you have to tell him the truth. Now," she said, her voice firm. Panic seized me like a physical blow. But what if this is what he's been waiting for? What if it changes everything? There was a silence on the other end of the line. "And what if you don't? Are you going to build a marriage on top of a lie?" She was right, of course. But my family didn't build an empire by being transparent and vulnerable. We built walls, fortresses, and I no longer knew how to live without mine. Tears in the bathroom, desperate calls to Chloe. "You think the drama is over? Honey, I haven't even hired actors to play my parents yet." "Are you absolutely certain these actors are legit?" I whispered to Chloe, as we watched my parents rehearse their lines in the living room of my fake apartment. She rolled her eyes for what felt like the 100th time that day. I had hired the Smiths, the irony was not lost on me, from a local community theater group to play my middle-class parents for a Sunday lunch with Leo. "Honey, I put in 35 years at the Ford plant before I retired," Mr. Smith practiced, adjusting his prop glasses. No, less formal," I corrected him, my voice tight with desperation. "Try something like, 'Yeah, I busted my hump at that plant for 35 years, man. My God, I didn't even know how normal people were supposed to talk anymore. Maybe he'd like a nice lasagna? Mrs. Smith, my stand-in mom, asked for the 10th time from the kitchen. I have a family recipe that's a real crowd pleaser. I shook my head frantically. No, please, just the spaghetti is perfect. Nothing fancy. I tried to picture my actual mother, a woman who has likely never set foot in a kitchen, hearing she was being portrayed by a sweet lady who spoke with pride about a recipe binder. Was my mother at a detox spa in Switzerland right now? Or on another one of her obscenely expensive spiritual retreats in Bali? We hadn't spoken in months, which was standard for us. The doorbell rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Was Leo late? No, I'd set the clock forward by 10 minutes just to have time for one last rehearsal with my parents. I rushed to the door and froze. Standing there was not just Leo, but a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a gaze that could see right through you. Maddie, this is my grandmother Clara. She insisted on meeting you. He smiled, completely oblivious to the small-scale heart attack I was having internally. The woman, Clara, scanned me from head to toe with that look only grandmothers possess, the kind that feels like a full-body MRI that detects lies. So, you're the young lady who's made my grandson stop talking about building codes during our Sunday lunches? She asked, taking my hands in hers. Now all I hear is, Maddie said this, Maddie did that. If I made it through this day, it would be a certified miracle. I survived my hired gun parents, but could I survive Grandma Clara's X-ray vision? Little did I know, the real test of my deception was just around the corner. So, what's the offer? I asked, trying to keep my voice light as Leo showed me the email on his phone. We were on the tiny balcony of my fake apartment after another simple dinner. I nearly choked on my $2 chuck, which, I have to admit, was starting to grow on me when I saw the salary. To me, it was the equivalent of a generous monthly allowance, but from the way his eyes were wide with disbelief, it was a life-changing sum. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Maddie. One of the top architectural firms in London. They saw my urban renewal project on LinkedIn and, well, they want me to start in 2 months. London, 2 months. My brain went into overdrive. How could I possibly explain that I could just quit my fake job and move with him? Or worse, how could I ever bear to be apart from him? Are you going to take it? I managed to ask, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Leo put the phone down and took my hands in his. Maddie, I've been thinking about it all night. It's the kind of offer that would define my career, but he paused, and I could see the genuine conflict in his eyes. I don't want to be without you, and I know you can't just drop your job and your whole life here. The irony was so sharp, so painful, it almost made me laugh out loud. I could buy that entire damn architectural firm if I wanted to. 3 days later, Leo called. His voice had a quiet resolve I'd never heard before. I turned down the offer, he said simply. My stomach plummeted. But Leo, your career? There will be other opportunities, he cut in. But there's only one you. Those words didn't feel like a compliment. They felt like a conviction. He was sacrificing his dream for me, or rather, for the carefully constructed fictional version of me. That night, I dragged myself to a nearby dive bar and ordered a shot of tequila, then another. By the third, I was pouring out my entire sordid tale to the profoundly uninterested bartender. I'm ruining the life of the man I love because of this stupid, insane lie, I slurred. Rich people problems, a guy grumbled from 2 stools down. He had no idea he was talking to one of the wealthiest women in California, crying into cheap whiskey in a rundown bar, because for the first time in her life, someone truly loved her for who she was supposed to be. He turned down his dream job for me, or the fake version of me. And just when you think you can't possibly feel any lower, your father summons you for dinner. The invitation arrived on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, delivered by a private courier to the lobby of my fake office building. Edward Sinclair requests the presence of his daughter, Madison Sinclair, at the celebration of his 60th birthday. It was so classically my father. Not a please or an I miss you, just a royal decree. There was, however, a postscript in his sharp, impatient handwriting. It's been 3 months, Madison. This little game of yours has run its course. I swallowed hard. I couldn't ignore it. The fallout would be nuclear. But how could I explain a weekend-long disappearance to Leo? My aunt in Santa Barbara is sick, I lied, feeling a piece of my soul corrode with every new falsehood. Leo, being the man he is, immediately offered to drive me to the train station. No, it's okay. My cousin is picking me up, I said, a little too quickly. The car waiting for me around the corner wasn't my father's Porsche, but a discreet Uber I'd called to take me to a rendezvous point where the family driver would pick me up, far from any prying eyes. The Sinclair estate was exactly as I remembered, magnificent, cold, and decorated with the impersonal perfection of an Architectural Digest photo shoot. Decided to finally rejoin the real world? My father remarked as I entered his study. Edward Sinclair, the feared and admired real estate magnate, looked entirely unimpressed by my experiment in simple living. You think this is a joke, don't you? I countered, feeling that old, familiar family rage begin to simmer. He smiled, a condescending smirk that always made me feel like a 5-year-old. I did the same thing before I met your mother, you know. Lived for 6 months as a substitute high school teacher to make sure she wasn't after my wallet. I was completely frozen. You? What? He shrugged, pouring himself a Macallan 25. The difference, sweetheart, is that I knew when the game was over. You seem to be getting lost in the character. I stared at my father as if seeing him for the first time. Was I just becoming a carbon copy of him? Discovering your father ran the exact same play you're running is like getting a glimpse of your future and not liking the view one bit. But wait, it gets even more complicated. 2 years of our relationship flew by in a blur. 2 years of increasingly tangled lies, of working late when I was actually at the family estate, craving a dose of my old life, of making endless excuses for why he'd never met my coworkers, and of tiny slip-ups that I prayed Leo would never connect the dots on. Like the time I unthinkingly paid for an expensive dinner and had to invent a convoluted story about a surprise birthday check from a distant aunt. Or when he found a Black American Express Centurion card in my purse. It's just a prop. They wanted us to test the new design at work. And Leo, my sweet, trusting Leo, seemed to buy every last word. Or he pretended to, which honestly just fueled my paranoia even more. Maddie? Maddie? Oh my God, is that you? The high-pitched shriek from behind me at the Grove made my blood run cold. Leo and I were just enjoying a walk, with me carefully steering him away from the designer storefronts, when Tiffany Davenport, an insufferable girl from the business program I'd dropped out of, materialized like a Gucci-clad ghost. Madison Sinclair! I can't believe it! You totally fell off the face of the earth. I half thought you'd fled the country after that whole scandal with your dad buying up that controversial land development, and, for the first time in my life, I was grateful for Chloe's chaotic energy. She appeared out of thin air, as if summoned, and accidentally tripped, sending a massive iced latte splashing all over Tiffany's white dress. The ensuing commotion was the only cover I needed to grab Leo's hand and pull him away. Who was that? Leo asked as I practically dragged him toward the parking garage. And why did she call you Sinclair? My mind was racing, desperately trying to compute a plausible lie. My wealthy cousin, I blurted out, feeling beads of cold sweat on my forehead. Everyone says we're practically twins. She's the worst, totally spoiled. Her dad's the black sheep of the family, made a fortune in, real estate? We don't talk. It's a whole big family drama thing. Leo frowned, and I could practically see the gears turning in his head. I never knew you had a rich cousin. I forced a laugh that sounded more like a strangled squeak. Oh, there's a lot of boring family stuff I've never bothered to mention. For one terrifying second, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. And the sting of it was sharper than I could have ever imagined. 2 years of living a lie, and I was nearly taken down by a socialite who probably couldn't even spot a fake Birkin. But the worst was yet to come, and it was arriving in a small velvet box. Are you okay? You look like you're about to pass out, Leo observed, as I stared blankly at the basket of garlic fries I hadn't touched. We were at the Tin Keg, a cozy dive bar in Echo Park that had become our place, with its graffiti-carved wooden tables, local IPAs on tap, and the best sliders in the city. I was definitely not okay. The entire month had been an emotional roller coaster, haunted by nightmares where Leo discovered everything and left me, Or worse, stayed with me only for the money. Just tired, I lied, again, attempting a smile. It's been a rough week at the office. The irony was, I actually was working now, helping Chloe with her event planning startup, because sitting in my apartment faking Zoom meetings was driving me insane. That's when I noticed that Leo had also barely touched his food. He seemed unusually agitated, running a hand through his hair every few seconds, his classic anxiety tell. "Look, I know this isn't the fanciest place in the world," he began, "and for no reason at all, my heart started to hammer. And you probably deserve a much grander moment, but—" He reached into his pocket, and before my brain could catch up, placed a small, slightly worn velvet box on the table between us. "I've been saving for a year," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he opened it to reveal a simple, delicate ring with a single, shining stone. "I know it's not much, and I wish I could give you more, but—" "Yes," I interrupted, tears already streaming down my face before he could even formally ask the question. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." The other patrons in the bar started to clap and cheer as Leo slid the ring onto my finger. It was light, understated, had probably cost him everything he had, and it was worth more to me than every diamond in my family's vault. "Let's celebrate," I whispered, after we finally broke from a long kiss. "I have a surprise for you." My heart was pounding. It was now or never. After 3 long years, it was time for Leo to meet the real Madison Sinclair. God help me, I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of the happiest moment of our lives. He proposed with a ring that cost him months of his salary. I said yes. And then I decided it was the perfect time to burn it all to the ground. After all, who needs a happy ending, right? "You missed the exit," Leo noted, his voice laced with confusion as I drove straight past the turnoff from my Silver Lake apartment. I gave a nervous smile, my hands sweating so profusely on the steering wheel of the old Honda Civic, borrowed from the estate's groundskeeper, that I was afraid they'd slip. "We're going somewhere special," I replied vaguely, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. As the car moved across Los Angeles, leaving the trendy neighborhoods behind for increasingly exclusive ones, I watched Leo's expression shift. By the time we were cruising through the manicured streets of Beverly Hills, past sprawling mansions hidden behind high hedges and imposing gates, he was completely tense. "Maddie, where are we going?" "Almost there," I murmured, turning onto Crestview Drive, one of the most prestigious streets in the city. When I pulled up to a pair of enormous, wrought-iron gates marked with a subtle but undeniably elegant S, I punched in the security code and watched Leo's face as they swung open silently. "Welcome to the Sinclair estate," I said softly, driving up the long cobblestone driveway. My home. The silence inside the car was deafening. I parked in front of the neoclassical mansion I grew up in, with its towering columns and vast, dark windows, and killed the engine. "Leo," I began, turning to face him, "there's something I need to tell you." The walk to the grand living room was the longest of my life. Leo followed me like a ghost, silent and pale, as I chattered nervously about the history of the house, the art on the walls. "That's an original Rothko. It was a high school graduation present, desperately trying to fill the oppressive void." In the main hall, I had staged everything: champagne on ice, trust documents that would give him access to a portion of the fortune, even a ridiculous pitch deck explaining my motives. I had to be sure someone loved me for me, you see? After so many gold diggers, I just wanted— My voice trailed off as I saw the look on his face. It wasn't the anger or greed I had braced myself for. It was something far worse. Absolute soul-crushing disappointment. Just then, the doors to the room burst open, and my father stormed in, clearly intoxicated, a glass of scotch in his hand. "So this is the boy you've been using for your sick little psychological game?" Driving to the mansion, I had imagined shock, maybe some anger, followed by forgiveness. Oh, how cute and naive I was. If there's an award for the most disastrous reveal in history, I think I just won it. You know those moments when you think, okay, this is officially the worst possible situation, and then the universe smirks and says, "Hold my beer?" That was precisely how I felt as my father staggered into the living room, wearing that predatory smile I knew all too well. "Dad," I managed to say through clenched teeth, You're supposed to be an aspen." He shrugged, draining the last of his scotch. "Change of plans. Couldn't miss the grand finale of your little social experiment, could I?" He turned his attention to Leo, who looked as if he'd been turned to stone. "I bet she never told you about the others, did she?" "What others?" Leo's voice was barely a whisper. My father let out a booming laugh that made me physically recoil. "My daughter has this fascinating theory about men, that they're all gold diggers, you see. So she plays the part of a poor girl for a few years, dangles the fortune, and the moment they show the slightest bit of excitement," he made a sharp, slicing gesture across his throat. I felt my entire world begin to fracture. "That's not true," I protested weakly. But the words sounded hollow even to my own ears, because in truth, there had been others. 2, to be exact, Peter and Grant. But it had never gone this far. I had never actually fallen in love. How could I possibly explain that now? "Enough of this charade," my father grumbled, picking up a remote control. To my horror, a large panel on the wall slid away, revealing a projection screen. "Welcome to the Museum of Suckers," he sneered, clicking a button. An image flashed on the screen. Me with Peter, my college boyfriend, his face a mask of shock as he entered this very room. Then another photo of Grant, the lawyer I'd dated for 6 months. "You kept pictures?" I whispered, mortified. "Family memories," my father replied with chilling cruelty. "This one promises to be a real highlight, though. 3 years is a new record, isn't it, sweetheart?" Leo rose to his feet slowly, his face an unreadable mask. Without saying a single word, he pulled the ring from my finger and placed it on the marble coffee table. The soft clink of the small piece of jewelry on the hard surface was the most devastating sound I had ever heard. "Welcome to the Museum of Suckers," my own father's words. And to think the day could still get worse. "Leo, wait!" I scrambled after him down the grand staircase, stumbling over my own feet. "I can explain. It's not what it looks like." God, I sounded like a character in some terrible soap opera. He stopped cold at the bottom of the stairs, turning to face me with eyes I no longer recognized. "It's not what it looks like?" he repeated, his voice terrifyingly calm. "It looks like you lied about everything, absolutely everything, for 3 years. It looks like I was just a lab rat in your sick experiment to prove some twisted theory about men. It looks like the person I fell in love with doesn't even exist." Every word was a perfectly aimed dagger. And the worst part? I had no defense. He was right. After Leo was gone, I turned to face my father. The rage that filled me was a white-hot inferno, unlike anything I had ever felt. "You destroyed the only real thing I have ever had," I screamed, grabbing the nearest object, an obscenely expensive porcelain vase, and hurling it against the wall where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was completely unfazed. "No broke-ass architect is getting his hands on what we've built," he declared coldly. "You should be thanking me. A few more months, and you would have made the biggest mistake of your life." In that instant, something inside me finally snapped. "Get out of my house," I ordered. He raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Your house? That's funny. I don't recall seeing your name on the deed." I grabbed my purse and the keys to the borrowed car. "Then I'm getting out of yours." The days that followed were a blur of unanswered texts, deleted emails, and ignored phone calls. I went to Leo's office, only to be told he'd taken an indefinite leave of absence. A desperate trip to his apartment resulted in a painfully awkward encounter with his roommate. "He doesn't want to see you, man," was all he said before closing the door in my face. Chloe eventually showed up at my fake apartment, now my only real home, armed with cheap wine and a large bar of chocolate. "So, half of our friends think you're a sociopathic manipulator," she informed me matter-of-factly while twisting the corkscrew. "The other half says you were just protecting your assets." I took a long swallow directly from the bottle. "And what do you think?" She offered a sad smile. "I think you're just a girl who was raised in a gilded cage and has no idea how to function in the real world." No truth had ever hurt quite so much. I'd lost the man I loved, my father, and my fortune, all in one night. And you think you're having a bad day? My new routine was pathetic. Wake up, stare at the ceiling for an hour, migrate to the couch, stare at the wall for a few more hours, and methodically ignore the calls from my father and the emails from his legion of lawyers. My bank accounts were frozen. Dad always knew how to pull the leash. But I had enough cash stashed away to survive for a couple of months. After that, well, I tried not to think about the after that. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, started showing up daily with food. "You're wasting away to nothing, child," she'd say, forcing a plate of her famous casserole into my hands. No man is worth this much misery. If only she knew the misery was entirely self-inflicted. "You need to get out of this apartment," Chloe declared after I'd spent 2 weeks in self-imposed exile. "And you also need a job, a real one this time." I looked at her as if she'd just suggested I climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. A job? Me, Madison Sinclair? I did a quick mental inventory of my marketable skills. I could speak 4 languages fluently. All those private tutors had to count for something. I had an encyclopedic knowledge of modern art. My private collection was worth millions, and I possessed a decorative business degree I'd never actually used. "I have a friend who's opening a new art gallery in West Hollywood," Chloe continued undeterred. "She needs a receptionist who's fluent in English." A receptionist? I almost laughed. Almost. Because, honestly, what was the alternative? My first day at my first real job was profoundly humiliating. I, who had dined with senators and brokered multi-million-dollar deals on behalf of the family enterprise, was now quoting gallery hours and fumbling with sales receipts. "You're hopeless with the card reader," my new boss Louisa commented bluntly, "but you have a good eye for the pieces." The client seemed to respond to your explanations. It was the first praise-adjacent comment I'd received in weeks. I walked home that evening with aching feet, a minimum-wage paycheck in my future, and a strange feeling in my chest that I eventually identified: pride. It was small and fragile, but it was there. I had done something entirely on my own, without the Sinclair name or fortune to grease the wheels. As I sat on my tiny balcony, watching the city lights twinkle to life, I wondered if Leo would ever know that, in some twisted way, he had finally set me free. From billionaire heiress to gallery receptionist in 3 months. My story would make for a terrible reality TV show, but as it turned out, the universe had a few more surprises in store for me. I've discovered that grocery stores on a Tuesday night are strangely serene places. There I was, Madison Sinclair. Yes, I started using my real last name again, at least in my own head. In the middle of a Trader Joe's, having a profound internal debate about the merits of organic versus conventional avocados. 3 months ago, a decision this trivial would have triggered a full-blown identity crisis. Now, it was just another Tuesday in my new, surprisingly manageable life as a functional adult. I had even mastered the art of making that bolognese sauce without setting off the smoke alarm. Small victories. "The organic ones are better for guacamole," a familiar voice said from behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly sent my shopping cart into a pyramid of artisan olive oils. Clara, Leo's grandmother, was standing right there, holding a reusable tote bag and looking at me with an expression that seemed to peer directly into my soul. "Clara, Hi. Brilliant, Madison. Truly a master of eloquence." The older woman surveyed me with those wise, intimidating eyes. "You've lost weight," she stated simply. It wasn't a question, but I felt compelled to answer anyway. "New job. It's been pretty hectic," I trailed off. "And a broken heart, I imagine," she finished for me, plucking a bag of quinoa from the shelf and placing it in my cart. We ended up having coffee at the little cafe next door. The whole situation felt surreal and, in a strange way, deeply comforting. "Is he okay?" I finally worked up the courage to ask. Clara let out a long, slow sigh. "He's surviving, as are you." Her gaze softened ever so slightly. "You know, when I first heard the truth, I was furious with you. No one hurts my grandson and gets away with it." I swallowed hard. But then I remembered how he used to talk about you. Not about how you looked or the things you did together. He would talk about the sound of your laugh, the unique way you saw the world, how you cried your eyes out during that movie Marley and Me. She took a sip of her coffee. "You can't fake that, child." When we parted ways, she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Sometimes we build our own labyrinths and then get lost inside them. The trick isn't to find another place to hide. It's to find the way out. Running into your ex-boyfriend's grandmother in the organic foods aisle is the kind of thing that only happens in the movies or to me. But believe me, this was just the opening act for what fate had in store. The call came on a Sunday afternoon, while I was, for the third time that month, reorganizing my tiny closet. Ms. Sinclair, this is Alistair Finch from the law offices of Finch, Covington & Dunn. My immediate assumption was that my father had hired a new set of lawyers to harass me into coming home. I'm not interested in, I started, but he cut me off. This is regarding your maternal grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. I regret to inform you that she passed away last week. My grandmother? The almost mythical figure I barely knew, the one who had cut ties with the family when my mother married my father? She left a will, the lawyer continued. You are the sole beneficiary. The small brownstone in Boston my grandmother had left me was, in reality, a magnificent, historic home on Beacon Hill worth a small fortune. On top of that, there were stocks, a portfolio of investments, and a summer home in Martha's Vineyard. And a letter. Madison, she had written in a shaky, elegant script. I never approved of the life your mother chose, but my greatest regret was leaving you to grow up in that world. I hope it is not too late for you to find a path that is truly your own. Sitting on the hardwood floor of that grand but warm home, I wept like a child. For a grandmother I never got the chance to know. For a life that could have been different. For a future that was no longer a binary choice between absolute wealth and feigned poverty. I spent the next week in a state of utter conflict. I could sell everything, step back into a life of privilege, but this time it would be on my terms. No father, no lies. But something gnawed at me. I remembered Leo, his eyes shining with passion as he talked about his dream. To breathe life back into abandoned urban spaces and turn them into community hubs. Architecture can change lives, Maddie, he used to say. Imagine the difference we could make if we just had the resources. The idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. I picked up the phone and called Alistair Finch. I want to establish a foundation, I said, my voice firm with a newfound sense of clarity. And it needs to be anonymous. For the first time in months, I felt the glimmer of a purpose. Maybe I couldn't fix what I had broken with Leo, but I could at least do something worthwhile with the privilege I'd been given. An unexpected inheritance, a letter from a ghost, and suddenly, I had a mission. And maybe, just maybe, a shot at a second chance? Ms. Stone? The receptionist eyed me with a hint of confusion. I nodded, adjusting the severe bun and non-prescription glasses I had adopted for my new role as Beatrice Stone, advisor for the Phoenix Initiative. 3 months of meticulous planning had led me to this exact moment, sitting in the waiting area of the architectural firm where Leo worked, about to present a proposal to fund community-focused social projects. The board was incredibly impressed with your firm's work in low-income housing, I commented when I was finally shown into a conference room to meet the director, a middle-aged man who seemed genuinely shocked by our interest. We would like to fund a pilot project, something truly transformative. Our most talented architect in that field has just returned from a leave of absence, the director said, flipping through my proposal portfolio. Leo has some revolutionary ideas for the old cannery district down by the port. My heart skipped a beat. Excellent. I would like to meet him, if possible. The words had barely left my mouth when the conference room door opened, and there he was. Leo looked thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a scruffy beard I'd never seen before. He glanced at me without a flicker of recognition. My simple disguise, it seemed, was working. I couldn't decide if I was relieved or heartbroken. The weeks that followed were a form of sweet torture. I was working side by side with Leo, and he had no idea who I was. I listened to his brilliant ideas about how to transform a derelict space into a vibrant community center, complete with a library, art studios, and an urban garden. The initiative is very impressed with your vision, I remarked during our third meeting, keeping my voice clipped and professional. Especially the concept for the green roof and the solar array. He smiled, that same heart-stopping smile I knew so well, and for a painful second, I forgot we were supposed to be strangers. It's important that it's sustainable in the long term, he explained, leaning over the blueprints. These communities have been let down too many times before. I don't want this to be another project that launches with a big press conference and is forgotten a year later. I swallowed the lump in my throat. How had I been so blind to the truly extraordinary man he was? And how had I been foolish enough to think I could live without him? Working with the love of your life while he has no clue who you are. If that's not the plot of a painfully awkward romantic comedy, I don't know what is. But the next act? That was pure, unadulterated family drama. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" My father's voice boomed across the quiet art gallery, causing a pair of wealthy clients to jump and stare. Fantastic. Just the scene I was hoping for on a peaceful Saturday afternoon. I forced a tight, professional smile onto my face. "Good afternoon, sir. Is there a particular piece I can assist you with today?" He glared at me as if I had completely lost my mind. And maybe I had. "Don't play cute with me, Madison. First, you vanish into that shoebox you call an apartment. Then you take a job as a shop girl. Art consultant," I corrected him automatically. "And now I find out you're blowing your grandmother's inheritance on some ridiculous charity for the homeless?" I took a deep, steadying breath, briefly picturing the headlines. "Heiress strangles real estate tycoon in posh art gallery." A bit much? "Perhaps we could discuss this outside," I suggested through gritted teeth. Once on the sidewalk, the professional mask crumbled. "How did you find out about the foundation?" I took every possible precaution to keep my name off the official records. He let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Do you honestly believe any significant financial transaction happens in this city without me knowing? Especially when it involves my own daughter?" Classic Edward Sinclair, always believing he was in control of the entire board. "I'm not your puppet anymore," I stated, a surge of courage rising from a place I didn't know existed. "And frankly, I no longer care what you think." He narrowed his eyes, giving me the same calculating stare that had intimidated CEOs and senators for decades. "Your mother had a rebellious streak too, right before she remembered how comfortable life is when someone else is paying the bills." It felt like a physical blow. The pieces of a puzzle I never knew I was solving suddenly clicked into place. "Mom didn't leave us to go travel the world, did she?" My voice was quiet, but the realization was deafening. "She was running away from you." His silence was all the confirmation I needed. That night, I did something I should have done years ago. I started digging, researching Eleanor Vance, my grandmother, and through her old connections, I finally found a phone number. 3 days later, I was on a bus headed to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to find the woman who had given birth to me, only to vanish from my life entirely. Facing my father was liberating. Learning the truth about my mother was devastating. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen at the grand opening of the community center. The grand opening of the Phoenix Center had finally arrived. After 6 months of relentless work, the derelict old cannery district was unrecognizable. In my time as Beatrice Stone, I had watched Leo transform from a man left shattered by my deception into someone reborn through the passion for his work. Or perhaps he had always been that person, and I was only now seeing him clearly for the first time. The event was packed with local residents, city officials, and members of the press. And then there was me, hiding behind my prop glasses and severe bun, trying to remain invisible until the very last moment. "I'd like to thank the Phoenix Initiative, and especially Beatrice Stone, who believed in this project when no one else would," Leo said from the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd for me. This was it. Slowly, I took off the glasses. I pulled the pin from my hair, letting it fall around my shoulders. I walked toward the makeshift stage, feeling hundreds of curious eyes on me. And then I saw it in his eyes. The moment of recognition, shock, confusion, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. "Good evening," I said into the microphone, my voice shaking just enough to betray my fear. "My name isn't Beatrice Stone. I am Madison Sinclair, the founder of the Phoenix Initiative, and I have a confession to make." The conversation that followed was exactly what you'd expect, an initial explosion of raw anger. "Another lie? Are you serious, Madison?" Followed by my own desperate, rambling explanations. I managed to pull him aside to a quieter corner of the bustling hall. "I don't expect you to forgive me," I said, my voice thick with sincerity. I just wanted to create something good from the damage I caused. All those times you talked about this dream, I was there, but I wasn't really listening. I was too busy trying not to get caught. Leo was silent for what felt like a lifetime. You know the most ironic part? He finally said, his voice flat. I always knew something was off. There were little things, details that never quite added up, but I loved you so much that I just chose not to see them. That truth hurt more than any accusation ever could. So what now? I asked, barely daring to breathe. He looked out at the community center, at the children already swarming the new library and basketball court. Now, I think we need space. This, he said, gesturing to the incredible building around us. This is a miracle. But you and I both know we can't build a future on a foundation like this. We can't build a future on a foundation like this. His words cut me to the bone because they were true. But I had to believe that sometimes, even from the most poisoned soil, something beautiful can grow. And that's the primary difference between an etching and a lithograph, I explained to a couple from New York who seemed genuinely fascinated by the new exhibit. 6 months after the inauguration of the Phoenix Center, my life had settled into a rhythm that was surprisingly, deeply satisfying. Louisa, my boss, recognizing my good eye, had promoted me to assistant curator of the gallery. My little apartment in Silver Lake, yes, the very same fake one, was now officially my home. I had reconciled with my mother, a gentle, wounded woman who was living a quiet, simple life as an artist in Santa Fe after finally escaping my father's toxic orbit. And most importantly, I was finally at peace with myself. Maddie! Chloe burst into the gallery like a human hurricane, waving a magazine in her hand. Have you seen this? He won the National Architecture Prize. I took the magazine with trembling hands. There he was, on the cover of Architectural Digest, smiling proudly in front of the Phoenix Center. Leo Martinez, Rebuilding Community from the Ground Up, the headline read. Tears of pride welled in my eyes. You're going to the awards ceremony, right? Chloe demanded. I shook my head. I wasn't invited. She rolled her eyes with that special kind of exasperation reserved for best friends. It's a public event, you idiot. I already bought us tickets. She brandished them with a triumphant grin. It's tomorrow night. And yes, I already picked out that stunning blue dress you've never had the nerve to wear. The ceremony was exactly the kind of black tie affair I used to frequent as Madison Sinclair, the heiress. A grand ballroom, a sea of influential people, and endless trays of champagne. But this time, I was there as a nobody, trying my best to blend into the shadows at the back of the room. I had a feeling I'd find you here. I nearly dropped my glass as I turned to find Clara, Leo's grandmother, standing beside me. How did this woman always manage to find me in a crowd? Come with me. I saved you a seat up front. Before I could protest, she was gently but firmly guiding me through the maze of tables. But I don't want him to see me, I whispered in a panic. She gave me an enigmatic smile. Sometimes we need to be seen to be forgiven. When the ballroom lights dimmed and Leo walked onto the stage to accept his award, our eyes met for a fleeting, electric moment. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't look away. 6 months can feel like an eternity when you're heartbroken, or like the blink of an eye when you're rebuilding a life from scratch. But the real question was, would it be enough time to earn a second chance? I could just leave right now, I muttered to Chloe as the post-ceremony cocktail hour kicked into gear. He's seen me, he knows I'm happy for him, mission accomplished. My best friend rolled her eyes so dramatically I was afraid they might get stuck that way. Madison Sinclair, you did not get this dolled up and come all the way down here just to bolt like a scared rabbit. She gave me a little shove. Besides, it's too late. He's heading this way. My heart threatened to beat its way out of my chest. Leo was, in fact, walking directly toward us, his gleaming award in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. Hey, he said simply, his voice calm and steady as he reached us. Chloe, the beautiful traitor, mumbled something about needing to find the bar and vanished into the crowd. Hi, I replied, feeling like an awkward teenager all over again. Congratulations on the award. You really deserve it. He nodded, a small tentative smile playing on his lips. Thanks for coming. I didn't expect to see you here. We stood there for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity of awkward silence. Your speech was incredible, I finally managed. That part about trust and honesty being the most important foundations, in buildings and in relationships. I let the sentence hang in the air, unsure of how to finish it. Leo studied me for a long moment, as if he were seeing me in a new light. You seem different, he said finally. It was not what I had been expecting to hear. Different how? Older? More haggard? I joked nervously. He shook his head. More you, like you're finally comfortable in your own skin. I felt a warm blush creep up my neck. I am different, I admitted quietly. I'm finally me. He glanced around the ballroom filled with powerful people, then his eyes came back to rest on me. Would you want to get coffee sometime? Just to talk? I nodded, not trusting my voice to form words. As we exchanged numbers, again, I caught a glimpse of Clara across the room, watching us with a smile that said, clear as day. I knew it. A reunion. You seem different, and my foolish heart was already doing gymnastics. But what happens when two people who built everything on a lie try to start over with the truth? The coffee shop Leo suggested turned out to be the very same one next to the Chase Bank in downtown LA where we had first met. Was it a coincidence or a deliberate choice? I didn't have the courage to ask. I arrived 15 minutes early and spent every single one of them second-guessing my entire existence. Was this dress too casual? Should I have put my hair up? Why on earth was I this nervous? Is this seat taken? His voice pulled me from my internal spiral of panic. Dressed down from the award ceremony, he looked less like a celebrated architect and more like the man I once knew. Or the man I thought I knew. How's the gallery? He asked after we'd ordered. I told him about my promotion, about the new exhibits I was helping to curate. He told me about the new projects that had been green-lit thanks to the success of the Phoenix Center. The conversation flowed easily, just like old times. But there was a massive elephant in the room that neither of us was brave enough to address. Until he did. I made mistakes too, you know. I paused, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. What do you mean? He sighed, looking down at his hands. After I found out about everything, I did some digging into your family. I used some of the things I'd learned while we were together to help a journalist friend who was working on an exposé about your father. It was my turn to be stunned into silence. You? What? I was furious, he admitted, a look of shame on his face. I was hurt. I wanted revenge. The story never ran. My friend was either paid off or threatened. I never found out which. But my point is, we both did things for the wrong reasons, believing they were the right ones at the time. We sat in silence for a moment, letting this new, shared fallibility settle between us. So where does that leave us? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Leo took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. I've been thinking, what if we try an experiment? 1 month, we live in my world. The next month, we live in yours. And at the end, we decide where and how we really want to live. No more lies. One final test. A month in my world, a month in his. It seemed so logical. But life is rarely about logic, is it? It's about finding out where you truly belong. I have never laughed so hard in my entire life as I did watching Leo, looking deeply uncomfortable in a rented Armani tuxedo, trying to figure out which fork to use at a formal charity gala. It's outside in, I whispered, as he stared at the row of silverware as if it were an alien spaceship's control panel. Or is it inside out? I can never remember either. He gave me a gentle kick under the table, both of us stifling our laughter. The month in my world was a surreal experience. Leo was a good sport, but he was clearly a fish out of water at the endless social events, stuffy dinners, and high society functions that had once been my entire life. On the other hand, I felt surprisingly, blissfully at home during the month in his world. We had simple dinners with his architect friends, spent a Saturday volunteering for a Habitat for Humanity build, and had movie nights on the worn-out sofa in his Echo Park studio. I think we both know the answer, don't we? Leo said one Sunday afternoon as we walked through Griffith Park, our fingers laced together. I didn't have to ask what he meant. We had found our equilibrium. We would use my money, not my father's, to fund more community projects, but we would live a modest life by choice, not by pretense or necessity. I have one more surprise for you, I told Leo a few months later, covering his eyes with a blindfold and leading him down a familiar hallway. If this is another community center proposal, you know we're already juggling 3 of them, right? He joked. It's better. When I removed the blindfold, we were standing in the middle of my old, fake apartment in Silver Lake, the first place we had ever truly lived together, even if it was under false pretenses. Except now, it was completely transformed. Leo had secretly worked with a small team to redesign the entire space. Walls had been knocked down to create an open, light-filled layout. A beautiful, functional kitchen had been installed where we could cook together, though I was still a culinary disaster. And there was a shared office for our 2 worlds to finally, truly merge. It's not a mansion, he said, his voice thick with nerves as he watched for my reaction. But it's honest, and it's ours. When he got down on one knee, holding a new ring, simple, elegant, but chosen with so much more meaning and truth than the first, my answer was just as immediate and certain as it had been before. This time, however, there were no secrets, only a solid foundation on which we could finally build a life. Yes, it was the real Madison saying, yes, a new home, a new proposal, a new me. But every good story needs one last plot twist, right? Mine just happened to show up in an Armani suit, carrying decades of unprocessed emotional baggage. The Phoenix Center, the building born from our complicated history, was almost unrecognizable, decorated for our wedding. It was adorned with simple wildflowers and strings of fairy lights that cast a warm, magical glow. Long wooden tables were set up where people from every walk of our lives mingled without pretense or ceremony. I saw Mrs. Gable animatedly debating the secret to a perfect crust with Leo's business partner. Chloe was, predictably, shamelessly flirting with one of the handsome artists from the gallery. And then, to my absolute astonishment, I saw my father standing awkwardly near the entrance, clutching a small, elegantly wrapped gift. I know I wasn't invited, he said, as I cautiously approached him, but I felt I should come anyway. He seemed smaller, somehow, less of a titan, more of a man. Or maybe I had just grown taller. Your mother told me where it would be, he continued, his gaze avoiding mine. We've been talking. I raised my eyebrows, genuinely shocked. Edward Sinclair, the man who never admitted fault, never ceded an inch of ground, looked almost humbled. I don't expect you to forgive me now, or maybe ever, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be different. He held out the small package. Inside was a single antique brass key. It's for your grandmother's house on Martha's Vineyard. I got it back for you. I know it was special. It wasn't a storybook ending with my father. We established clear boundaries, sporadic lunches, always on neutral territory. Sometimes his old controlling instincts would surface, and I would simply get up and leave. And other times, he would surprise everyone with an unexpected gesture of kindness. As Clara once wisely told me, old trees can bend in a new wind, but they rarely change their shape completely. Later that evening, as I danced with Leo under the stars in a simple white dress that cost less than one of my old handbags, I felt richer than I had ever been in my life. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, spinning me gently under the soft glow of the lights. I smiled, thinking of the impossible, painful, beautiful journey that had brought us to this exact moment. "I was just thinking that some lies can cost you everything," I answered, my voice clear and true. "But the right truth can buy it all back if you're just brave enough to live in it." When he kissed me, to the sound of cheers and whistles from the incredible, eclectic group of people we now called our family, I knew I had finally found the true value of things. And no fortune in the world could ever purchase that.